Hello, my name is Alex, and in this video we're going to be looking at how to draw things using code, specifically using p5.js. So the first thing we want to do is download the p5.js. Go to p5js.org and go ahead and go to the download page and download p5.js complete. It'll come in a zip folder with an empty example. So you can go ahead and make a new folder. Call it whatever you want. I'm going to call it games without assets. Okay. And then you're going to want to hold down Shift, right click inside of the folder, and open PowerShell window here. And if you have Python 3 installed, you can type py-m http.server and hit enter. And what that lets you do is you can now open up your web browser of choice and type in localhost:8000, and that will open up that folder in your web browser. And now if you go into this empty example, this is where we're going to be doing our code. So if you hit Control-Shift-I, this opens up the console, and this is where we will see any errors. And we can also go to Network and tick this box that says Disable Cache. This way our code will always be the most up-to-date it possibly can be. If you don't have Python 3, there will be a link in the description to where you can install it, and once you install it, it should automatically be accessible via the command line that I showed you. Next, you're going to want to open up your text editor of choice, which for me is Sublime Text 3, because it color codes your keywords and it detects the type of programming file that you're using and the programming language that you're using, and it also allows you to open up folders. So we're going to open a folder. We're going to go to Desktop, Games Without Assets, and we're going to open up our empty example. But first, let's rename it something less generic. We're going to call it Drawing with Code. Now this means that we'll have to go back and reopen this in here because this folder name changed. So now we can open up our index.html and our sketch. And as you can see, the index.html was done for us. So I'm not really going to talk about this in this video, but I do encourage you to look into it and learn what all these different things do if you don't already know. But we're going to be focusing on these two functions, setup and draw. The setup function gets called once at the beginning, and the draw function gets called once per frame, which is 60 times per second. Since our goal is to draw something using JavaScript, we should first have some idea of what we're trying to draw. So let's open up Paint. Here in Paint, you can just select the pencil tool and roughly sketch out what you want to draw. So first, let's try to draw a little simplified version of my logo. So it's got a triangle, it's got another triangle, a circle, and two rectangles. Drawing the circles and rectangles is pretty easy with p5.js. However, doing the triangles is going to take an additional helper function. So back in our code, the first thing we're going to want to do is go to our setup function and create canvas. And we will need to give this function a width and a height. So I'm going to make it 720. Actually, I'm going to make it 600 by 800. Then let's hop down and create a new function and call it triangle bird. And we're probably going to want to give that an X and a Y position on the screen. So we know from our sketch that we're going to want to draw some feet. We're going to want to draw a beak, a body, and finally an eye. When making any kind of draw function in p5.js, it's important to start with a push and end that function with a pop. And what these two functions do is they allow us to use functions like translate, which will move the origin position, that's the 0, 0 position, before we start drawing. So we can go ahead and translate by our X and our Y, and that means that now the center of our bird is at 0, 0, at least while inside this function. Before we can draw our body and our beak, we're going to need a helper function that will let us draw equilateral triangles. But I think we can be a little bit more general than that and write a function that will let us draw any equilateral shape. So we'll go ahead and call it equilateral. If that's misspelled, you can spell it correctly in your code. And since this is a drawing function, we're going to want to start with a push and end with a pop. And the things we're going to want for this function are an X position, a Y position, a size, and a sides. For our body, we're going to want to do equilateral, zero, 0, let's say like 30, and 3 sides since it's a triangle. Inside the equilateral function itself, we're going to want to use the begin shape, and end shape functions. And what these do is they let us draw any number of vertices and then it connects those vertices with lines and fills it in. So we're going to need a for loop here. From 0 to the number of sides. This will draw a vertex for every side of our shape, which is good, but now we need to know where exactly that vertex should go. So we're going to need a new variable called p, and it's going to be a vector, so we're going to do create vector 0 and our size divided by 2. This means that if our center is right here, p is 0 on the horizontal and half of size right here. So this is the point 0, comma, size over 2. And what that means is that our size is the radius of a circle that would go around the outside of our shape. So if we hop back into the code, that means we need to be able to rotate our vector. We need to be able to rotate our vector using a set angle theta, which is defined by 2 times pi divided by our number of sides. So now all we need to do is rotate our canvas by theta, after we draw each point, and we draw our points at px and py. And with that, if we call this function inside of setup, since we don't need to redraw it every time, we just need to draw it once in order to see it. If you call our triangle bird function and just place it at 0, 0. Actually, let's place it at 30, 30, just so it isn't clipping off of the screen. Oh, looks like I forgot something important. You need to pass in the constant variable close if you want your shape to be drawn. I also forgot that we need to translate by our x and y. And let's also draw some type of background before. So what we do to do that is we just call the function background. And let's make it 125 should be a nice gray. Rather than rotating our canvas with this function, let's actually just rotate our vector p. And there we have our triangle. Let me make it a little bit bigger and then I'll explain why it's upside down. So let's draw it at 200, 200. Let's also flip our canvas. I forgot. I actually wanted it to be 800 by 600. And then let's make our equilateral triangle, let's say, yeah, 300 across. So now if we go back here, you can see that our triangle is upside down, whereas in our sketch, it seemed like it was going to be right side up. But the reason for that is that in p5.js, the y-axis, the positive y-axis goes down, and the positive x-axis goes to the right. So it's not your traditional coordinate grid, and that's why it feels a little bit upside down. So the way we're going to make it fit with the way we originally wanted it to be is by just making this size on this vector negative. There we go. Right side up equilateral triangle. And now we can use that same function to draw the beak. But we're going to need to offset it. Let's try offsetting it by half the size and raising it up a little bit. But we're also going to want to be drawing it as an upside down triangle. If we go back to our sketch, you can see that this triangle has the point on the bottom. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to add another push and another pop. And inside of here, we're going to rotate by pi. Oh, and it looks like I moved it too far in the wrong direction. That seems about right. So now all we need to do is draw the eye and the feet. The eye is pretty simple. It's just going to be a circle, which we can draw by calling the circle function. And we're going to put it at probably a little bit above center, which means doing a negative y. And we'll probably make it only 30 in diameter. Let's see how that looks. Oh, that's too low. There we go. Much better. Before we go any further, I'm going to introduce another thing that is good to do, which is to give your drawing functions a size variable. Because that means we can clean up some of these magic numbers. So instead of that, we'll do size. Instead of 100, we'll do size over 3. Here we can do minus size over 2. This can be minus size over 4, size over 4, which I know is a little bit different than 50, but we're going to readjust it. Oop. I forgot we need to pass in this new variable, so we'll pass in 300. So yeah, we messed our stuff up a little bit. So let's instead do minus size over 4. And we probably want this to be over 5, actually over 6, I think. Yeah, there we go. So all that's left now is to draw the feet. And we'll do that by using the rect function. And we're going to want to do it twice. So for the left foot, we want to draw it a little bit back from center. So we're going to use minus size over 4. And we're going to want to draw it a little bit lower, which means doing size over 2. The rectangle itself is defined by its width and its height. So we probably want to give it a width of 1/4 of the size, actually maybe 1/8 of the size, little skinny legs, and a height of 1/4 of the size. And the only difference between the left leg and the right leg is where the X position is. So we'll put it over a bit to the right. Now that's almost what we want, but not quite. We're going to want our height to be maybe size over 4. I think those legs were a bit too long, so we'll do size over 6 for the legs. And let's draw this one at 0. Getting there. So the issue we were having where the right leg was too far to the right was because the rectangles draw from their upper left hand point right here, and they draw out. So this one is 1/4 to the left and then out, whereas this one is right at 0 and then out. So we actually want this one to be 1/8 of the way to the right. Perfect. And the advantage of basing all of these things off of the size variable, you can see every number is some multiple of the size. Oh, except for the size of the eye. So let's say that that is size over 12 and see how that looks. I got a little bit smaller, but I think that is okay. But because we based everything on the size, that means if we want this to be bigger, say 400, all of the relative sizes and positions stay the same, which is good because, say, if you wanted like a bunch of birds, you call this function several times. Say 300, no, that's 400. 300, make one really small, make one medium sized, and let's make one at, oh, that's way too big. And let's make this one pretty small. You see? So even at this really small one, you can still see that the general shape is the same. But drawing isn't just about the shape, it's also about the color. So let's get rid of all but the big void. And the way that we can do the colors is by going in here, and before we draw our feet, we can set a fill. And you can actually just set it to the word orange. And we want our beak to be orange too. We want our body to be yellow. And our eye to be black. Da 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 da. And one last thing that I like to do is you can go ahead and put right at the start of your setup function, you can say no stroke. And what that does is it gets rid of these black lines that you can see. So if you refresh the page, all the black lines are gone and it just looks a little bit more mathematical. So that's an example of how to draw something using geometric shapes. In the next part, we'll take a look at how to draw more organic shapes. But until then, thank you very much for watching.